Well, I love the way that you frame it, that you're looking at this as, oh, great, I came across all of this anti stuff, but it's an opportunity for growth.
If it's starting to get a little overwhelming or anxiety inducing, like take a break. There is nothing wrong in that, and it's incredibly healthy.
It's good to answer some questions, but then say, here's some more resources you can go to.
If you are coming to that assumption, that can feel hard, that can feel icky. Let me maybe provide a different perspective for you.
Talk about how to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we love it. This is, as a previous episode said, we like to geek out on teaching the gospel. There are so many great things about it. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Kev. How are you?
Good. So a little factoid for you. What is the number one most used search engine?
I don't know, Google.
That's what I would have thought too. And so I'm going to tell you this. I'm bringing this up from past years, actually. So I don't know what it is today, but YouTube surpassed Google.
What? YouTube's a search engine?
Well, think about it. When you go on Google, what are you searching for? How to do things, information on specific things, and what do you do on YouTube?
Okay, you just totally, that was a shift for me. Didn't even think about YouTube as a search engine.
Right. And so in the same way, and again, I don't know if it's still that today or if it's ChatGPT now or what it might be, right? Well, for Julie, it is obviously.
Don't know if I should admit that.
Yeah, which has a whole bunch of implications that we won't talk about now. But in the same way, when we think about teaching the gospel, the first thing that I'm going to bet just about everything on when we say, let's teach the gospel, we think Sunday school class. We think young men's, young women's. We think Elders Quorum Relief Society, right? But how many ways is there to teach the gospel? Can we just go off on the different ways that we don't think as teaching, but it actually is teaching, right? Name a few.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited specifically to talk about one that we're going to talk about today. Well, is it bad if I jump right to it?
Go for it. Yeah, you bet.
I never thought about social media as a place where we teach the gospel, or YouTube, the most popular search engine, apparently, that I didn't even know was the most popular search engine. Like, there are so many people that are teaching the gospel through these different social platforms and engaging, massive amounts of people, probably more than most of us put in a classroom, for sure. Actually, not maybe, for sure, more people at a time than most of us ever stand in front of in our lifetime. Often.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about this. We have on our show someone who teaches without an opening and a closing prayer. And it's teaching. And Jasmin, Rappleye, welcome. We're so glad to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a delight to be here. It's like you said, YouTube is a main search engine these days, but also increasingly people just search their questions on Instagram search engine and on TikTok search engine. And of course, the big one is ChatGPT.
You're right.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I never thought of those as search engines. It's so, maybe I'm revealing my age. That's a little bit embarrassing.
Well, they're social media platforms first and foremost, but they all have search engines, especially YouTube really focuses a lot on search. And so people are increasingly just like not turning to Google, but turning to the platforms they are most frequently on to ask their questions and then find answers to them.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
People have questions about the church and about the gospel and their relationship with God and Christ. And where are they turning? They're to non-traditional ways of learning. And again, it doesn't start and begin with a prayer or begin and end with a prayer. It's off the cuff. I've got a question. Okay, let's go see what the interwebs say about this. So Jasmin, if you would tell us, how did you get into all of this, and how did it evolve into what you do now?
And maybe introduce what you do a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Jasmin Rappleye. I run a channel called Jasmin Rappleye on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. And I also help to host a podcast called Informed Saints with Neil Rappleye and Stephen Smoot. And hard questions is what we talk about all day, every day. It is just kind of the lifeblood and the bread and butter of what I do. Talking about, I love talking about the scriptures. I love talking about church history. I love talking about the temple, and I love everything about the church. But so many people have tough questions about these topics. They've encountered something on TikTok or they've seen something on YouTube, and it leaves them unsettled. And so one of the things I love doing is saying, can we take a step back and provide some kind of context here? Can we provide a different perspective on this tough question? Because sometimes there's just straight up misinformation on the internet. Sometimes there are just falsehoods that are shared about the church, and we can correct those. Sometimes what you see on TikTok is technically true, but it's being framed in a really sinister way that I think is an unfair representation of what's going on behind the scenes. So being able to talk about the greater context and how to actually interpret the events you're seeing or the headlines you're seeing can be just really helpful in helping stabilize your faith when you're going through a hard time. And so that's what I do all day, every day. I work at the Ancient America Foundation and the Faith Creators Alliance. That's like my full-time job. And we exist to help people come unto Christ by doing apologetics, by defending the church through like YouTube videos and podcasts. And so that is what I do all day, every day. How I got started in all of this, I mean, I don't know where to start that story, but as early as like in my teenage years, I had an amazing seminary teacher, my mother, whose biggest thing was asking questions when we would sit down and try to go through the scriptures together. The number one thing we had to come prepared with was questions, not necessarily answers, but just questions. And awesome. That was such a helpful exercise for me as just a young teenager. And sometimes they were stupid questions. Sometimes they were deep questions. Sometimes they were ones I was really worried about. But that's just the practice of just questions not being threatening, questions being an exciting thing. And that really unlocked the scriptures for me in so many ways, because it trained me to be curious about the scriptures. And that was really what set me on the path to just love learning about ancient history, ancient biblical history, early Christian history. So I went to Brigham Young University and I studied ancient Near Eastern studies there. And so did a lot of biblical studies, the Greek and the Hebrew and all of that. And then after graduating, I thought I would go into like web development or technology sector, but then ended up meeting up with John W. Welch, who was founding a new organization that they were calling Book of Mormon Central at the time. And they were looking for some technology support. And because I also happened to have the subject matter background, it ended up being a really good match. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door on this. I got into project management and graphic design and UX design and helping to develop their Scripture Plus app. And eventually, when we became Scripture Central, instead of just Book of Mormon Central, we launched a Scripture Plus app. And at that point, it's like, well, we probably should have a social media account to promote the app. And it was like, well, who wants to run an Instagram account? And I kind of volunteered saying, how hard could it be? And then I'm like, going home that night, Googling how to Instagram. And that's really how it started. It was the expediency of a job that got me to forced me to learn how to interact on Instagram. But then in 2020, TikTok really started to become a huge thing. And when I was thinking like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity to expand onto TikTok, I get on there and just it's overwhelming with anti-material and critical material of the church. It's night and day difference from Instagram at that point in history. And I just kind of felt very passionately about that at that point, like someone's got to do something about this. Some of these are just it's a lot of misinformation and it's a lot of misleading framing. Like so many young adults and youth are on this app and they're just having that flooded into their feed. I wish someone would say something. And then it kind of was just like, well, maybe I should try. And that's really how I got really involved in putting my face out there, trying to explain difficult questions in a very simple way, seeing Hollywood films that were coming out like Under the Banner of Heaven or Heretic or American Primeval, and seeing that there was a lot of misrepresentation going on there, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and then trying to articulate, okay, this show said this thing, how can we reinterpret it? Or how can we make sense of this from a faithful lens? And that's just what got me going. So eventually I built up the Scripture Plus account to a certain extent. Last year, I stepped away from Scripture Central and then started my own channel, Jasmin, Rappleye, and Informed Saints. And now that's just what I do all day, every day, is, again, talking about the church and difficult topics, and also bringing in church culture, church history, scriptures, whatever's relevant, whatever's trending in the news. Most recently, it's been, immigration. Before that, it's been the church and introducing new Bible translations. Before that, it's been Secret Lives of Mormon Wives or Surviving Mormonism. There's always something interesting to talk about, which is very exciting because it means that we have a unique spotlight on the church in our cultural consciousness right now that I think is just an exciting opportunity to take advantage of as members of the church, that people are interested in our faith in perhaps the biggest way it's ever been in history. And so what a great chance to then share our own perspectives on why we believe what we do.
I've when the last general conference happened and they said, we have this many people who have joined the church, my first thought went to, I wonder if that is because of all the possible negative things that have happened on social media, plus all the people like you, Jasmin, and there are so many others that go and say, okay, well, let's take this example, actually, and then explain it so simply. And they find both of these and they're like, oh, actually, that really makes sense. So I wonder how much of it could be that.
I won't chalk, the growth in baptisms to a single factor.
Of course not.
Sure.
Yes.
There's a ton going on. And we've got like a global environment we're talking about, not just like the Hollywood in the United States. But if you look back at historically how the church has grown, look back at like the 2012 Mormon moment when Mitt Romney was running for president, the Book of Mormon musical, and there was like this unique spotlight on the church. And sure enough, there was a small spike in baptisms during that era. And we've seen way more now. I mean, Book of Mormon musical and Mitt Romney is just like blown away by Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Surviving Mormonism, Heretic. We've just seen a barrage of media surrounding the church or tangentially related to it. A lot of it's not positive. A lot of it is negative. And yet it leaves people morbidly curious about who this weird church is. And most of the people aren't going to convert. Most of the people aren't going to necessarily like join the church, but nonetheless, it provides an opportunity to change people's perspectives when they see a portrayal online and then they go on TikTok and then there's a video from a positive perspective about what Latter-day Saints are really like. And you never know where those seeds planted can turn into.
Well, I love the way that you frame it, that you're looking at this as, oh, great, I came across all of this anti stuff, but it's an opportunity for growth. It goes back to what your mom said. Like, I think that people are afraid of questions in a way. And what you're basically doing is saying that, oh, this is going to create some questions in your mind. And let's take this as an opportunity to kind of dig in. And so I'm kind of curious how you get your topics. I mean, it sounds like obviously you're taking them from media, from social media, but how do you decide what's worth tackling, that could potentially be faith promoting versus do you ever say it's worth setting aside, or you're like, no, I don't want to have a filter. I want to tackle all of it. There shouldn't be anything that we don't talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily have like a filter of what I say, like, oh, we should never talk about this necessarily. But it generally, yeah, no, it's just that it depends on what I'm feeling, honestly. I mean, I've never run out of content ideas. I have like mile-long lists of videos I'd like to make at some point, and I'm just never gonna have time to do so. And so it really is like whatever's most relevant and recent and or urgent, I guess, whatever's trending in the media now, like, okay, let me prioritize making a video about that over some of the other ones that I would like to do eventually. But there are definitely points where there's stuff in the news and other creators might be talking about it and I choose not to. And most of that decision making comes from like, what's my personal life bandwidth right now? Like, I've got a lot going on. I just can't handle it. So we'll let someone else take that. That's certainly part of it. But then I have a rubric that I try to hold myself to as far as like what I make content about and how I make content about it. I think when you're talking on social media, it can be really, really tempting to chase views, to go after the clout, and like try to get the highest performing videos and be seen in front of the most people. And I very much see that as a real temptation. And so I've tried my best to mitigate those risks by having a rubric for myself of like what I make content about. I don't have it like up in front of me, but I basically like made a mission statement for myself. Like, I'm here to help people make sense of Latter-day Saint beliefs and church history and scripture, through scholarship and through like source-based analysis. And so when I go through my rubric, I kind of like go through my head, okay, is this video meaningfully going to help strengthen someone's faith or help them make sense of this issue? Or am I just doing it for the views because I know it's a trending topic right now?
Sure.
And is this going to build faith, or does this detract from faith in the way I've been framing it? Is this based on reliable sources and a sound methodology, or have I been a little sloppy in how I've put together this claim? And do I need to like get someone to review it for me and make sure I'm being more careful? And like, then I go through kind of my avatar checklist. Like, okay, if my sister saw this video, would I be embarrassed by that? If my bishop saw this video, how would I feel about that? If a critic of the church saw this video, how would I feel? And I just kind of go through the emotions I feel when I go through that list. Like, okay, check, check, check. Okay, actually, if I care about this person and they wouldn't like the way I framed that, maybe I need to reconsider just how I approach that. And that's not necessarily to say that I change my opinion or I change my approach or I flip-flop or I kowtow to certain people, but I just want to make sure that I'm taking into account a constellation of perspectives so that I'm not getting, it can be easy to just like isolate myself in my own silo and like, these are my opinions and this is what's right. Instead, remembering that there's a whole variety of perspectives and say, okay, how can I make sure that this is as careful as I possibly can be and as compassionate as I can be to make sure I'm being sensitive to people's perspectives and life experiences that are different than mine. So that has been what has kind of been my guiding star in deciding like what topics are worth covering. Is it worth diving into politics and talking about immigration when that's a really sensitive issue? Maybe, maybe not. And I have to kind of go through that checklist. So.
And I love that this part of the reason that I asked it, and your answer right now really helped in kind of what I'm processing. And I'll ask you a question in just a second. But part of why I asked it is because I do think that as teachers, as parents, as you know, when you are serving a mission, like an actual missionary, like you have to be informed. You have to know what's going on. And you also have to make some decisions about what you are and are not going to, ask questions about, bring up for a discussion, around the dinner table or in a classroom. And so as you were kind of going through your rubric, first of all, I have to just give you props for having a personal mission statement, because it really is the decision that governs all of your decisions. And like every video that you put up there, you have something you can ping it against. And I think that that is part of what we need to do as teachers. We need to have something that we can ping when we are considering what we're going to be talking about and not talking about in our classrooms. Is this going to get us closer to what we are trying to accomplish as our personal or teacher mission statement, whatever it is? But then in addition to that, one of the things I've thought a little bit about, because I do like to come in and like start a spicy discussion sometimes, just because I like to show, I'm not afraid of it.
Yeah.
And I'm Julie. Yeah, it's just how I am. It's my personality a little bit. And so as you were talking about your touch points, one of them is, is this kind of for me? And is it going to get views? Is it going to get clicks? So I want a teacher to say, is this something that is going to create some spice? Then people are going to go away and talk about it later. Or the other question, and this is something I'd love for you to help process through. How do you balance amplifying rhetoric with actually helping strengthen faith? Does that make sense? Like, think about, because you are not in a classroom, but a lot of the people that we're talking to are, or they're with their kids. And so at what point do you start talking, okay, are we primary questions or are we secondary questions? Like, what would your counsel be to someone to balance as you're thinking about it? Am I amplifying this rhetoric, or am I really diving in a way that helps to strengthen faith?
Okay, I think I understand.
There were a lot of words that I said.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. That wasn't very clear.
So,
Do you want me to rephrase?
Sure, that might be helpful. I apologize.
No, you're totally fine. I said so many words, and sometimes I get a little lost even in what I'm saying.
I guess my confusion is amplifying rhetoric. By that, do you mean like I'm using rhetoric to amplify a message, or I think I misunderstood that.
Okay, let me put it in kind of a different way. Maybe let's actually talk about amplifying tension instead of rhetoric. Let's talk about
Okay.
like the things that are being talked about. Sometimes there's this temptation to bring it up because we're amplifying that tension versus trying to really approach it in a way that helps people to strengthen their testimonies.
It's kind of clickbaity in a way, in the way you
Okay.
talk about
Yeah.
that, right?
Clickbaity in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
I
That's
think
it.
that's
Thank you, Kevin.
okay. That is a great question. And it's something I am trying to navigate all the time because the reality is, at least on social media, in most of where I do my teaching, it is you have to get, if you want people to hear your message, you have to get them to click. So you're constantly thinking about click psychology. How can I make whatever topic I'm dealing with interesting enough that someone would want to click and stay for the duration of that? But how do I do that in a way that's actually not compromising the quality or the value of the content itself,
Yes.
not veering into clickbait? How do I do that in a way that doesn't over sensationalize what I'm talking about? And how do I not just feed into the tension, like you say? And that's when it comes to how do I not feed into the tension, that's where I really try to bring myself back to my mission statement. Like, I'm here because I want to actually help people with faith. So when I'm making a script, when I'm trying to write out a video about how I want to approach a topic, I'm usually asking myself, like, yes, does this actually fulfill the mission? Am I actually touching the pain point that someone is feeling? And that's where I have to really just, before I even dive into the topic, analyze what actually is the pain point here. One example I've used before is Latter-day Saints and Nazism. This is a topic I'm not an expert in because I do more like biblical studies and church history. 20th century Latter-day Saint history is not my forte, but people have asked, like, oh, were the Latter-day Saints Nazi sympathizers in the 1940s? I've seen like a picture of Heber J. Grant in front of a Nazi flag. I've seen rumors that the church excommunicated Nazi resistors. What's going on here? And so I have to sit back when I approach a question like that and say, okay, what is the actual pain point? What is the problem that in the tension people feel when they are associating Latter-day Saints with Nazis? Well, like, okay, Nazi is kind of a universal bad. And if we're associating Latter-day Saints with that, that means that Latter-day Saints are bad. And it means that Latter-day Saints were maybe complicit or maybe even actively involved in the harm of a lot of people. Okay, that's bad. And in the case of, there is a photograph that was taken where Heber J. Grant is on a panel and there is a Nazi flag behind him. So when you are looking at that photograph, there's even the implication, like, was the prophet a bad guy? And if the church is bad, then the church can't be true. And that ultimately is kind of what it comes down to. You may have felt a burning in your bosom. You may have felt God's life touch you before, but all of a sudden, if you're confronted with information that feels like the church is bad, then all of a sudden that can counteract this feeling that you know that the church is true, and it can start to undermine that foundational testimony. And so, okay, if that is really the pain point, that people are concerned that the church is bad, how do I make a script in a way that helps to address that more than even the details of what was really going on in that photograph, which, by the way, was very misrepresented in the way it's been framed? Or how can I help people understand the context of what's going on in Latter-day Saint in the 1940s in Germany? And oh yeah, by the way, actually, there's way more to that story. Latter-day Saints, for the most part, were very politically neutral, and many of them were resistors, or, you know, very unfond of the Nazi regime. Some of them were active resistors, and some of them were executed for their resistance. And there were some that were members of the Nazi party at the same time. It's a complicated picture, just like pretty much any point in history. And so how do you help people not just info dump at them, but make sure you're addressing that pain point? Well, usually you start with the pain point. You want to validate what that pain point is. That, okay, here's what it comes down to. If the church were Nazi sympathizers, that means the church is bad. That means that the church is evil, or that you're participating in something bad. Yeah, that if you are coming to that assumption, that can feel hard, that can feel icky, that can feel gross. Let me maybe provide a different perspective for you. Let's walk through what that really looks like, and then see if on the other side we come to that same conclusion. Then you can present arguments, and then you can present information that might be helpful, but always making sure the underlying motivation is trying to understand what the pain point is and address it. And I think that's helped me not dive into the sensationalism and just amplify the controversy, but rather lower the temperature on it. Like, I see you, I hear the pain there. Let's see if we can unpack that in a way that is going to be helpful to you. And maybe at the end of it, you're going to come away and not come to the same conclusion that I do. And that's perfectly respectable. But there's still maybe an opportunity for us to understand each other a little bit better. And even that I consider a win and a net positive.
I love that. I love that, because when we're teaching just, regular gospel teaching, or whether we're teaching our kids or a friend and they have a question, I have found so many times that the question that they come with is not the underlying issue. It is deeper than that. And it is so easy to just hit that top topic and run with it and never actually get to what they're really concerned about. And so I love that you're kind of going, well, not that you're kind of, you are going deeper and trying to understand, what is that underlying issue? How does it happen? We recently had missionaries over, and just to talk to the two boys that are left at our house, our two youngest. And I wanted to talk about, how do you respond when people at school say things about our church, or say things to you about our church? How do you respond? And it wasn't, how do you answer their question? It's, how do you respond? And part of it was, we need to look for that underlying question, or the underlying concern that they have, or what are they really trying to get at? And as we have family members or friends or relatives that start grappling with church issues, of which you take a whole bunch of tough topics, Jasmin, and you do a great job of simplifying it. How do we get down to those real base? Is there anything that you are really focused on when you're, or maybe you're coming to more of a kind of a, oh, I've seen that before. When you get down to the real issue, are you seeing some themes that you get down to when it comes to diving deep into those deeper questions?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it and you're talking to someone, I think when I started doing this earlier on, I was a lot quicker to want to just give the answer, because in some ways, when someone comes to you with a hard question, it can feel subconsciously like an attack on your faith.
Sure.
They're coming to you because they trust you and they are trying to be vulnerable with you. And yet, if they're coming to you with an anti-claim or a critical claim, all of a sudden it feels like an attack on something that you love so deeply. And it can be so easy to then freeze up, panic, fight or flight, try to put up walls or be on the defensive. And so then you want to answer that question because you're trying to get rid of your own pain point there. Like, well, let's resolve this really quick. But the reality is that trying to just answer the question as quickly as possible can feel on the other side like being dismissive of what their pain is. Like, sure. Oh, you don't need to worry about that because A, B, C, D, and E, F, F, G, like all of these things make that not a problem. Don't worry. But clearly it is a problem for them. And it's not because they didn't know A, B, C, or D, though maybe they didn't know those things. It's because they're feeling something that's really just rubbing them wrong, whether it's because they think the church is bad, or Joseph Smith was a bad guy, or Brigham Young was a bad guy, or that the church has been unfair to certain people. And it really does come down to those underlying primal motivations. Obviously, we want people to believe that the church is true and that God loves them and God is real. Those are kind of like those primary questions. God is real. He loves me. I'm a child of God. The church is true. But usually when someone has a question about Joseph Smith's polygamy, about Latter-day Saints and Nazis, or our archaeology for the Book of Mormon, whatever it is, it's usually because there's a pain point tied to those primary questions. It is a secondary question, but the pain is coming because they feel like their faith in a loving God is being called into question, or their faith in the validity of the church is being called into question. And so sometimes it is helpful to help people separate, like, no, this is a secondary question and it doesn't need to be contingent upon those primary questions. Whether or not there was like a mistake made in church history doesn't need to necessarily affect your testimony that God is real and he loves you. But so often we do connect those two. So sometimes it's helpful to just walk someone through disconnecting the primary and the secondary questions. But it's so important to validate the pain points they're really feeling. Is God real and does he love me? Is the church good? Is the church true? Now, when it comes to like the primary themes I found it really instructive to learn a little bit more about moral foundations theory with Jonathan Haidt. He's talked about how like people categorize their primary values in people's most base moral compasses can kind of boil down to what they think about harm and care versus fairness versus authority, loyalty, purity. And in generations past, virtues like being loyal to someone, respecting authority, moral purity, those were important to previous generations. But increasingly, the youngest generations, we're seeing a deterioration of those, like trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And so that's not important, but fairness and care, those values are incredibly important to the youngest generation. And also it splits along political lines somewhat as well. If you tend to be more liberal, those are more important values to you than whether you're conservative, and you might have more respect for authority, loyalty, those sorts of things. And so when someone has a question about the church that's difficult, usually it's because it feels like it's attacking one of those primary values that, wait, the church wasn't fair to that person, or the church did harm to that group of people. Therefore, maybe the church isn't true. Maybe the church is bad. And that's what you have to start to unpack. Like, okay, well, did the church really do harm? And if they did, what are the implications of that? And sometimes the church didn't actually do harm. It was a mistake in framing. Sometimes there were mistakes made. And then you have to talk about, okay, well, what does that mean for the fallibility of the church versus the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and separating those two things. So there's a lot that goes into that. I remember once I had a friend come to me who had a bunch of questions about Book of Mormon archaeology, and it was clear that she was struggling with that. She was maybe going through a bit of a faith crisis. And I myself am not actually that knowledgeable in all of this stuff. I've learned a lot on the job, so to speak, but my husband is incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to the scholarship around the church. He himself is a well-published scholar. And so I immediately kind of went to him, again, in that kind of panic, fight or flight mode, like, hey, she's asking all these questions. Like, what do I say to her? What do I say? What's the answer to this? What's the answer to this? And he was kind of like, whoa. First of all, like, before you start giving her answers, like, maybe you should ask her, like, why does she think that question is important? Or like, what does she expect to find in Book of Mormon archaeology? Like, what is she looking for that would be evidence for her? And so he started asking me like just the next layer of questions. And I realized like, oh, I was like so quick to want to just find the answers to resolve the pain that I wasn't realizing that maybe there were assumptions and base expectations that were maybe misaligned that we needed to address and figure out first. Like, why did she think that we should find a stone that says Zarahemla right here in like Mesoamerica? Like, why is that your expectation? And I'm not saying that was her case necessarily, but sometimes we have expectations about like, well, if the Book of Mormon is true, then there should be a sign that says Zarahemla was here that archaeologists just find. And well, when you start to understand more about archaeology, you realize how complicated that actually is, and how that's maybe a flawed expectation to have, no matter if we're talking about the Book of Mormon or just trying to find a specific tribe within Mayan civilization. Like, it's just, that's not how archaeology works. But so often we have surface assumptions that maybe need to be addressed. So that was kind of my first lesson in, oh, maybe I need to be slower about answering the questions and more methodical about asking more questions. And I think that has been the biggest takeaway for me when it comes to actually interacting with people is don't like panic, fight or flight, and don't vomit a bunch of information. Ask them a few more follow-up questions. Like, where did you hear that? Or how did that make you feel? Or, wow, that really can be, I can see why that might trouble you. Can you talk to me a little bit more about like what you're thinking right now and how you came to that conclusion, and why do you think that, or why is that the expectation you have? Let's talk through that a little bit more. And then you start getting through those layers, and you can talk through methodology, you can talk through context, you can talk through some of those things with the ultimate goal of getting down to like, where's the real pain point there? And is that something we can resolve, or is that something we need to sit on? Is that something that I can just like sit with you on and just like acknowledge that that's a really hard thing, and I wish the best for you? And then always bringing people back to the primary questions of, is God real? Does he love you? Is the church true? And it doesn't solve every problem, but I do think it can be helpful.
So
it's so interesting. And I love hearing you point out something specific that I just want to reiterate. And I'll try to not say too many words so that it gets confusing again this time. But what you basically said is that instead of just giving people answers, you have to ask them more questions. Like, we get panicky, and I love how you kind of framed that as maybe we feel a little bit psychologically unsafe, and so we want to jump to defend it for our sake, not for theirs, but we think we're doing them a service. And I think that that's really important to remember. And so asking questions in response to a question is counterintuitive, but can be incredibly productive and incredibly empathic, because then the response that you give actually meets a need and addresses potentially a pain point, like you suggested. So I really wanted to reiterate that point, because I thought that was amazing, especially in light of the fact that your focus is on providing those answers. You're still making space for that empathy piece, right?
I mean, I try, and that's mostly in my personal life, because the reality is, like, when I'm on social media, I'm not making a video about like, hey, let's ask more questions right now, because of just the nature of the medium. And so I do feel that that's a weakness of the platform in general, that we're not able to model that question asking very effectively. But I think there's also a role for like having just those answers to those questions. So on my platform, that's mostly what I'm devoted to, is that piece. Like, okay, once they're in a place where they feel psychologically safe to actually explore the answers, I hope that I can be a resource where they can find some of those. And I think that can also be very, very helpful for people who are either maybe not they're going through a faith crisis, but they've just had some unsettling feelings. Having something that can just validate their faith, that like, no, you're not stupid for believing in the church. There are scholars who are brilliant, who have worked through these issues before you, and they've come out on the other side believing even more firmly in the gospel. And here's some things that you might want to know. That can be really helpful. And it also can be helpful for people who are kind of coming out of that faith crisis on the other side and are wanting to believe, but want something greater to hold on to. And that's when like actually coming in then with some of these answers can be a great foothold for them to feel like, okay, I can hang my hat on this a little bit while I'm working through these other things. So there's definitely a role and a place for just having the answers and spitting out information. But when it's someone who is coming to you and they are freshly dealing with some struggles that are hurting them a lot, letting the answers taking a back seat can be really helpful, because there is a time and place for them. And that's the time and place is usually where my own social media stuff comes in. For those people who are ready for it, who are looking for that, who are needing that in that phase of their faith journey.
And in my personal life, I have friends who are specifically like so terrified of being duped. Like, they just are like, I don't want to be the person that just believed. Like, they are terrified of that. And so there is a place, and having that type of a resource is amazing. I want to shift something just a little bit and ask you a question that might take us in a slightly different direction. I think that sometimes, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve for me, I think that sometimes people don't want to ask the hard questions. And I think, maybe it's because they don't feel safe. They're scared it's going to rattle their testimony. Will you talk for just a minute about the danger in not being willing to engage in some of these hard questions?
Well, I think the real stakes there are that if you're not willing to ask the questions, then it probably is masking maybe some insecurity you actually feel about them. And if that, I mean, that's maybe an unfair sweeping generalization, but for some people at least, if you are very fastidiously avoiding questions, maybe it's because it actually is a concern for you. Now, I'm not going to say that if you are feeling psychologically threatened by questions, that you should just open up the floodgates to anti-Mormon criticism to get at all of it. That's not necessarily a healthy approach either. Like, you have to do it in the time and pace that makes sense for you. But I personally have found that my faith can just become so much more rich when I do ask the questions. I've just found so much more joy and rewarding fulfillment by asking questions, by being curious. And so I'd hate for any member of the church to miss out on the beautiful connection they can have with God and the feelings of confidence they can have in their testimony after they've gone through the wrestle of trying to figure out what's true and what's not, and what really happened here. And is there some weight to this criticism, or was this misframed, or how do I make sense of this? And that process of wrestling is hard work, just like exercising, just like climbing a mountain. But there is a sense of joy, satisfaction that comes from getting onto the other side and feeling like I have even greater confidence in my God and in my faith now that I have gone through that process. So, I mean, for me, that's the greatest positive of asking questions. Now, I think if you don't want to ask questions, one thing that can happen is your children might then have questions and you find yourself unprepared, or you get thrown questions at you without your consent, whether that's on your social media feed or through a loved one, and you find yourself even more threatened or uncertain on how to deal with it because you hadn't confronted that before. So I would never tell someone to dive into anti-Mormonism if they are uninterested in that or not ready for that, or something that they just don't feel prepared to do. But if you want to have a robust, confident faith, and if you want to feel prepared when your children or loved ones come to you with questions, then starting to ask questions is the best way to get started. And they don't have to be like crazy questions, just any curiosity you've ever had about the scriptures. Just, nurture that curiosity. Go chase that rabbit hole a little bit, and you might discover that it was a really exciting endeavor to learn more about the scriptures or to learn a little bit more about church history. And then little by little, you start to get into maybe more contentious waters as you feel comfortable.
You almost verbatim gave my journey in a way of, at first I didn't care about the extra. I mean, there are questions out there. Sure. I didn't want to get into the anti stuff at all. And I didn't, if they had a question, I'm like, I'm okay not knowing the answer, because every answer that I've found, every question that there was that I've heard, there has always been an answer for, and I'm okay with that. And I'm not going to answer every single question that's out there, and I've got to end at some point. But then it came up where friends had questions, or children had questions, or other family members. And I wanted to be prepared for that. But there's always the bit of, how do you make sure that you're not diving in so deep that, you're just going after, and you're looking at anti stuff all the time and watching it. And, that can be a real thing as well. For me, it was just anytime I felt like it was just getting too much, I'd maybe look at maybe have a question, start dealing with it. And if I didn't feel the spirit around it, I backed out, thinking, and I've done that with a number of issues where I said, you know what, now is not the time to look for that. And I'm okay with that. And there have been times when I've gone back and I thought, okay, now is the time I can do that more confidently. And I did it. And it turned out to be, like you said, the insights that I find blow my mind and are incredible, and deepen my testimony and my conversion even more. And I love that. But I'm with you. I wouldn't say that just diving into all the Expo stuff right away is a really good way of asking those questions. So there's got to be some metering there. What are your thoughts on that metering process?
Well, I think you said it just right. It's just being super self-aware about where you're at mentally and emotionally. And if it's starting to get a little overwhelming or anxiety inducing, like, take a break. There's nothing wrong in that. And it's incredibly healthy. I remember a few years ago, there were some articles done about TikTok's effect on mental health. And obviously social media is deleterious to mental health overall, but TikTok was just so uniquely sticky in the way that it would send you down an algorithm rabbit hole, that if the algorithm could tell that you were interested in stuff about mental health, then it would send you another video about it. And, maybe it's helpful mental health stuff, or maybe it's like feeding into toxic mental cycles. And then you'd linger on that for a few more seconds, and the algorithm says, oh, you like some of that? Let me feed you more of that. And it starts to get more and more extreme. And, there were stories of people going down really, really dangerous mental health rabbit holes of very depressive states, going into ideation because they were just on TikTok and they went down this spiral of mental health. And I think a similar phenomenon can happen when you're dealing with questions of faith. We don't have the luxury anymore of just not bothering with anti-Mormon material, because if you have a phone, not only can you find it, but it's just going to get forced into your feed whether you want it or not. And so once you're confronted with an anti-Mormon video, your choice is like, oh, do I swipe or do I linger? And maybe you linger, and maybe you learn a little bit more about a critical claim people have of the church. But when you do that, the algorithm's going to start feeding you more of that. And so you just have to be super self-aware of how you are feeling. How is your connection with the spirit, and making sure that you're taking mental health breaks as you need it. I do. I take breaks from social media when I feel like I'm just not in the right headspace anymore. And that means, yeah, I'm not going to publish videos for a while, but I just need it. So I think that's the best advice, honestly.
That's great.
I love that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about informed saints.
That's where I wanted to go there as well. Thank you. I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah, me too. Especially because like it's like one of those things that I've just dived into a little bit. I wasn't aware of it. I know it's pretty recent. Remind me when you started doing that.
Yeah, so we launched that in September, and it's a podcast produced by the Ancient America Foundation. And I do it with my husband, Neil, and our friend Stephen Smoot, who's an Egyptologist, or he's getting his PhD in Egyptology. And we just saw a gap that there've been a lot of great podcasts that have come out of the Latter-day Saint space recently, like yours. And some of them are tackling apologetics. Some of them are doing Come Follow Me. Some of them are just doing wonderful devotional content. But we saw a gap where there was a lot of interesting apologetic material coming out, of people wanting to defend the faith and using evidence and cool, exciting claims. But there wasn't always a great source that was grounded in the scholarship and highlighting what scholarship can say about these issues. So we just wanted to carve out a little space where people could go if they really wanted like source-based analysis. So sometimes our discussions are pretty nerdy and they get even quite technical sometimes. But what we're trying to do is take wonderful scholarship that many researchers and scholars and BYU professors have done over the decades and years and try to make it a little bit more accessible, specifically on these hard topics. So, I mean, we've done an episode on Latter-day Saints and Nazis in 1940s Germany. We've done episodes on Joseph Smith's use of seer stones, on polygamy. We just barely recorded one that will come out soon on DNA in the Book of Mormon and what that does and does not say about its authenticity, or about whether the gold plates really could have been a plausible ancient artifact based on criticisms people have said. And so we just want to take the criticisms and make sure that we're then driving people to actual scholarship that they really can hang their hat on. Like, don't take our word for it. Go check out this book. It's got footnotes, it's got resources, and it's been peer reviewed. And this is something that can just demonstrate that you really don't have to be scared or embarrassed to be a member of the church or to be confronted with hard questions, because here are all these people with not just amazing credentials, but brilliant minds who have worked through this, and they've come out on the other side believing, and they've come out with incredible insights into the gospel that I never even knew before. I mean, things like my favorite topic when it comes to this is like the Book of Abraham. That is one of the biggest punching bags for ex-Mormons and critics of the church, because they're like, oh, we found the papyri and it doesn't say anything, or Egyptologists have proven it false. And it's just a really easy headline. But when you dive into it, usually there's a ton more complexity there that they're not telling you, that there's way more to the story. And when you dive into that, there's so many pieces of evidence for the authenticity of the Book of Abraham. There are so many cool things in Egyptology that Joseph Smith just happened to guess correctly. I mean, it starts, when you look at the constellation of the data, it starts to become more implausible to believe the ex-Mormon narrative than to just believe that maybe the Book of Abraham is authentic. Maybe there's something to this. And so I've loved diving into the scholarship of this and realizing that not only is our faith defensible, but it is very exciting and cool.
That's so awesome. Like, I was just listening to a podcast this morning on my run where Carrie Mulestein was talking a little bit about this. And he's like, it almost takes more faith to not believe the Book of Abraham than it takes to believe the Book of Abraham, because you have more evidence about the plausibility of some of the things in the Book of Abraham. Anyway, just to your point, he was saying the same thing. And I was like, I've never really thought about it that way. That's amazing. Kev, sorry, you were awesome. It was a great podcast. It was awesome. Kev, you were about to say something. I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off.
Oh, I don't remember what I was going to say.
Well,
never
mind then. Okay,
it just came and went.
I have another,
just like quickly. Oh, go for it, please.
So I started thinking about your process, because I'm thinking about teachers, right? They're going in to teach a topic about something. So here you have informed saints. You have a topic that you're going to be diving into. How do you guys go about that? Like, I know you all play different roles because you have different backgrounds, and you kind of are, coming together as this great complementary team in that podcast. And I hear you highlight different things in conversation with each other, which is really makes for an interesting dynamic. How do you prep?
I wish we did more prep than we do. Well, when it comes to informed saints, yeah, we all have different roles, and I'm not the scholar in that particular setting. I'm more like I introduce the topic, I can help the conversation go, and so my preparation is a lot less than it should be. But as far as their preparation, they're so knowledgeable already. When we say let's do a video on this topic, they already know like 5 papers and 2 books that they're going to read to prepare and get ready for it. So they're amazing. And we'll usually come up with like some kind of outline, like, okay, here's what we will do is, again, we always try to make sure we start with the pain points. We'll usually try to find a TikTok or a Twitter thread or something on YouTube that we can specifically highlight in the episode of a claim that critics have made, because that kind of, just highlights the relevancy of this topic and also highlights exactly, we don't want to straw man the criticism. Like, here's what a critic is saying. How do we unpack this? So we'll usually start with a critical claim that is on social media currently, and then we'll come up with an outline of like, okay, let's let's ask a couple questions about how do we I don't know, I'm trying to find a specific example, but let's unpack like, okay, what resource are we diving in? We're usually talking about a specific paper or a specific book or a specific scholar's work that is going to help us illuminate that. So we got to pick what the scholar or book or work is. And then we're going to unpack like, okay, how do we make sense of this? What are some of the underlying assumptions that are being made by this claim? And let's just go point by point and say what scholarship has to say about this, and then come away feeling like, okay, you can study deeply but still believe boldly in the church. Now, my own process when I come in contact with a question is very, very similar in that, like, I got to start with the pain point. So I find a critical piece of media, whether that's a TikTok or a Twitter thread, and say, okay, what's really going on here? What's the pain point underlying this critique? And then after I do that, then I read tons of stuff. I just want to like go to all my go-to sources that I know are trustworthy and that have excellent documentation to say, let me just like educate myself a little bit more about this, because I'm not entirely aware of this particular criticism. And that usually is things like going to Mormoner.org or going to FAIR or going to the Interpreter Foundation or Scripture Central. Some of these places that have great summaries of scholarship is my favorite. And then after I read, I kind of like sit on it for a while and say, okay, this was the critical talking point. Here's kind of what the scholarship says. I try to narrow it down to like 3 main points of what is summarizing what the response to the criticism is. But then with social media, you really can only highlight like a little tiny 60-second soundbite. So I narrow that to 1 point. What's 1 point I want to highlight? I can't solve all the world's problems, but what's 1 problem I can maybe solve? And then I'll go through and then, okay, if this is the 1 point, that's my thesis essentially. Now, then I'll go through and try to outline a script. Okay, if this is my thesis, the conclusion I want someone to come to at the end, what is the hook at the beginning that will get them interested to stay to the end? And then, just like you write your 5-paragraph essay, the rest kind of just fills in. You're like, okay, here's a few points that can get us to that conclusion. And then always end with a call to action to make sure they know that there's more they can learn about this somewhere else. This isn't the end of the discussion. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So I usually do a call to action to whatever article I was studying. And then I use AI to help me, but often it's in like a review role. I'll like put my script through there and say, critique this for social media best practices, but also like make sure, like help me fact check myself, like, and provide sources if I got something wrong. And, ChatGPT is very faulty when it comes to that, but sometimes it can catch my blind spots. And then not always, but I very often will go and get human review from people I trust, often like my husband, because he's a researcher. And I want to make sure that I'm not having a blind spot, that I didn't straw man the argument, that I didn't mischaracterize what's going on here, that I was careful in how I did it. And I don't always get it right. I make tons of mistakes when it comes to this, but I learn a ton, especially when the commenters call me out on things that I maybe didn't get entirely right. I learn. And then, and then I just record, I edit, I go do it. So that's kind of the process of how I go about tackling. You have a question, let's find the pain point. Let's read as much as we have time for. Narrow down to a few points, then narrow it down to the 1 single point you can at least highlight, and then find a hook that makes it sound interesting, and then build out the argument for helping people come to that conclusion at the very end.
Which
one of the things
translates perfectly to a classroom. Sorry.
Yeah, it does. And one of the points that translates perfectly to a classroom that I want to point out real quickly is that you have a call to action at the end. And I've noticed that you do that. And I love that. If you want to learn more about this, you can go here and here and here and go check that out. And I love that you do that. And I think with gospel teachers in any role, again, whether it's the standard gospel teacher or the parent or the friend or whomever, it's good to answer some questions, but then say, here's some more resources you can go to. That way they feel like, oh, I'm not just getting one person's opinion of it, but there's more out there that if I really wanted to, and maybe I do, I can go and learn a heck of a lot more. And maybe I should. I mean, there's even motivation in that, right? If we just say, here's my opinion, there's not a lot of motivation to go out and learn more. But if you say there is more, and here's where you can go find it, then that may just prompt some motivation to dive in a little bit deeper.
I certainly hope so. Because I don't think you can save testimonies in 60-second TikToks, but I do think that you can do a lot of good by doing a lot of study for yourself, both in the scriptures and the words of the prophets and in some scholarship. It can't hurt.
Yeah.
So ironically, you were telling us at the very beginning before we started that you're going to be speaking at a Peacemakers conference. And so I would love to just hear a little bit about, because it kind of made me go, oh, so interesting that a lot of what you do is intended to help create peace. I think that that's peace in people's hearts, but it can also be peace in their relationships with people who see things differently than they do. And I think a lot of us have experiences where that might be a member of our family or a very close and dear friend. And we want that relationship to stay intact. And we have this, kind of elephant in the room sometimes, or it can become that in some people's relationships, and it becomes difficult. And so I would love to just kind of hear your take on, and you talked a little bit about how you're going to frame it, which I think is awesome, on how being informed can help you be a better peacemaker.
Well, yeah, there's a Peacemakers conference coming up on February 7th, and this is run by the Holy Rebellion, and they asked me to talk on how to answer hard questions with compassion and boldness. And I love this idea. I think the Holy Rebellion podcast is really passionate about wanting to defend the church online without being defensive and trying to find a more compassionate way to answer questions in a way that's still effective in algorithms. And I think that's a really noble cause. And when it comes to like my own work, I've never framed it in the form of peacemaking, but in some ways it really is. I mean, it's this idea that I want people to find the peace of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm so passionate about that. And I feel like there is no greater source of peace. So I want people to feel that they are confident in the gospel. And I think that's the biggest thing about becoming informed is you don't have to fear questions anymore. You can feel so confident in your faith, not to the point of arrogance, because there's always more to learn, but you can feel that your foundation is not shaky or sandy, but that it's firm when you are diving into the sources for yourself, when you're going beyond TikTok or going beyond a podcast and you're going into the books, you're going into articles, or you're studying the scriptures for yourself. That's when the inspiration really can come. That's when the Holy Ghost can really speak to you, is when you're doing that personal study. And so I see that this whole effort is about helping people come into Christ and pointing, no matter what creators do, we're trying to point everyone to Christ, not to us necessarily. And when you do become more informed, you can have that confidence that just provides a lot of meaning and purpose, and that you don't have to feel threatened, scared. You can just love the gospel of Jesus Christ with all you have. And then you're in a position where you can really help others. It's when you feel confident in your own faith that you can start to outreach and help others with the questions that they have as well. And to do that with compassion and boldness. We should not compromise on our values. We shouldn't compromise on our beliefs, but we also don't have to be jerks about it. We can be compassionate in ways that can help them really process what's going on and help them come unto Jesus Christ and not put up walls.
That's great. Thank you. In wrapping this up, let's do a call to action. And if you would, if they want to learn more about everything that we've talked about, what are the resources that you go to? Who are some people also online that they can go learn more about? You talked about Holy Rebellion. They're a great group. Love watching their content as well, where can they go?
Well, I'll certainly plug the Informed Saints podcast
Yes.
selfishly. But when it comes to like when I have questions myself, my go-to place is mormoner.org. It's part of the BH Roberts Foundation, and their website is just full of hard questions, and it's just very concise, very pithy, but incredibly well documented. And so I love that. And so if they don't have that question that they've answered already, then I'll go to either FAIR, because they have a wiki website full of answers to questions, or I'll go to Interpreter because they have a lot of resources, or Scripture Central sometimes has short articles on scholarship that's really helpful. Anything that's just pithy and short and concise and can summarize the scholarship and then help me get into what the actual scholarship is my first line of defense. Basically anything text-based. Podcasts are great. Instagram's great. And if that's your preferred medium, awesome. But I always prefer to like just give it to me straight. Like give me the actual sources. Let me read what's going on here. And an underrated one actually is the Gospel Library app. They've come a long way in providing good resources. In the Gospel Library app, there's a section called Topics and Questions. And that has everything from like Holy Ghost and agency to things like abortion and the church's relationship with race. And they've had the church history department be working on these, and other departments as well, to create articles that answer some of those questions. Now they're going to be correlated and they're going to be institutional. So it's going to have like a different tone to it. But it's another great resource if you just want straight from the church, what's their position on this tough issue.
That's great.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for being on. We learned so much, and I'm excited to go visit these other resources and, of course, Informed Saints. I've loved watching it. I've learned so much from it. So go check that out. We'll put links to all of these things at teachingrestore.com on this episode. So go check that out as well for all those links. And just again, thanks, Jasmin. It's been wonderful. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Teaching Restored. Now, we want you to know that there's more than just this podcast, more than just the discussions that Julie and I have with each other or with other guests that come in. There's a lot more. Let me give you a few things that where we just expand this reach. Number one, there's a community where you can go online and learn from a lot of others and even give ideas yourself. And that is found if you go to leadingsaints.org or teachingrestored.com and look at the community link there. That'll take you to a whole community. And we are a part of the Leading Saints community there, where we talk about, among other things, how to be better gospel teachers. So I would highly recommend you go there. We have some incredible discussions, some real passionate discussions of ideas and different things that we can do to be better gospel teachers. And also we have all of our socials. If you haven't been there, go connect up. We bring in other people's posts that you may not have seen that have great ideas, snippets from General Conference, and just ideas that don't take an hour podcast. They're a lot shorter that we just want to throw out of some good ideas. And then if you would, of course, please pay it forward. Share it with other gospel teachers. That way we can all become more converted, more gospel-centered, and just better teachers of the gospel of Jesus Christ overall. Thanks for joining us in this journey. The team here at Teaching Restored, we so appreciate it. And we love what we do. And this has been a wonderful journey for us. And we're excited about where this is still going. We have more plans to expand the content and expand things out for you. So stay tuned and we'll see you around. Thanks for joining us.